Welcome to the 6th module of our Instructional Assistance series presented by the El Dorado County Office of Education. This recorded web module has been created to train instructional assistants on applied behavioral analysis. As part of this web module series, we have incorporated a processing guide for you to use to take notes, make reflections on your learning, and jot down additional questions you may have as you think about your role as an instructional assistant and how applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, impacts your work. To access the processing guide, please take a moment to access our Padlet, which we will show you on the next slide. Please pause the module and access the Padlet in order to download the processing guide prior to continuing with this training. As we go through the slides, feel free to pause the slideshow as appropriate to give yourself time to take notes or jot down any questions or reflections that you have, and also to answer the questions on the processing guide. This module series has its own Padlet, and a Padlet is an online filing cabinet that provides access to resources. This Padlet will be updated as information changes. Here's the outline of what this web module will be covering. We will define what applied behavioral analysis is. We will then review the benefits and the philosophy of ABA, then move into how to implement and the techniques that are used. Finally, we will review additional resources to assist you in your current position as an instructional assistant. Applied behavioral analysis, often referred to as ABA, is intensive programming that is tailored to a student's needs. Depending on the student's skill level as well as the level of their disability determines the amount of service they receive. ABA is often associated with students with autism. However, as we have discussed, other disabilities can benefit from ABA services. The earlier an individual receives ABA services, the better. However, no one is too young or too old to receive this type of intervention. Please complete the processing guide for this slide. So let's begin with what applied behavioral analysis is. Applied behavioral analysis is an evidence-based treatment that can improve one's life by building skills, reduce dangerous or harmful behaviors, and improve an individual's independence. Please complete the processing guide for this slide. Now we will explore what some of the benefits of ABA are. Scientific evidence shows ABA works more effectively than any other intervention. It helps to increase independence, track goals and builds new skills, capitalizes on a student's strengths, work with professionals who teach you how to support student improvement, teaches self-advocacy skills in household routines and how to be safe. It even improves behavior by focusing on positive reinforcements and can be used in a variety of settings. And finally, personalized for each student. Please take a moment to complete the processing guide for this slide. Next, we will review the philosophy behind applied behavioral analysis. Applied means the principles should be applied in a way shown to change behavior. Behavioral means specific actions are analyzed, assessed, and modified using scientific principles. Analysis means that progress is measured through analyzing data that is collected. Please take a moment to complete the processing guide for this slide. Next, we will review how applied behavioral analysis is implemented. The ABA approach attempts to teach desired behaviors by providing teaching tools that focus on simplified instructional steps and consistent reinforcement. Task analysis is when you break down a skill into smaller steps. It can be used to show a student the steps necessary to complete the entire task. Chaining refers to the method of teaching a behavior using behavior chains. Behavior chains are sequences of individual behaviors that, when linked together, form a larger task or behavior. Prompting. Prompting is where we give a cue or a hint to a student to help them in completing a task or behavior. Prompt fading is when we decrease prompts by gradually reducing the frequency or the strength of the prompt. And shaping. Shaping refers to the process of reinforcing closer and closer approximations to the skill, and can be accomplished by first identifying what the ultimate target is, and then providing reinforcement for behavior as they get closer and closer to that goal. Please take a moment to complete the processing guide for this slide. Task analysis is the process of breaking a skill down into smaller, more manageable components. Step 1, we start to identify what the target skill is and the prerequisite skills that the learner will need to have. We then break that skill into components, confirm that the task is completely analyzed, determine how the skill will be taught, and then implement the intervention and monitor progress. Using the task analysis, we begin to look at tasks and break them into those smaller components. On the left, we see that there's a checklist or task analysis for washing one's face. In this example, we see that the first step is to go to the sink. Step 2 is to gather the materials that will be needed, such as soap, a washcloth, or a towel. The third step in the visual sequence is to turn on the water. All of these steps are written down, and a picture depicts each step of washing a face. In the task analysis in the middle, we see the steps that are needed in order to go grocery shopping. In this example, there are no visuals, which means that the student who would use this can read. The task analysis on the right is a visual representation of the steps needed to vacuum. When analyzing a task, chaining may be the way to teach the skill. Chaining refers to a method of teaching a behavior using behavior chains. Remember, behavior chains are sequences or steps of an individual behavior that, when linked together, form a larger behavior. When teaching a behavior using chaining, the first step is to complete a task analysis. In this visual, you will see a forward chaining indicating by the blue arrow going down. This is when we teach the first skill and build on it. In this case, turn on the tap, meaning turn on the water. When the student can do that independently, then the student will be prompted to wet hands, which is the second step. As each skill builds upon themselves, then the student learns to wash hands independently. On the right, we actually see another arrow that goes upwards from the bottom and says backwards chaining. Backwards chaining is where the student knows the final step of a skill. You would prompt the student during all the other steps until the student mastered the final step of turning off the tap, or in this case, turning off the water. Then you would begin working on the prior skill of rinsing hands. So again, you prompt up to rinse hands and begin decreasing the prompts so that the student can begin to rinse hands independently and then turn off the tap. Most of the time, you will be using regular chaining, but you may work with a student who knows the final step of a task, and backwards chaining may be where you need to start. Prompts are cues or hints that provide supports to a student to increase the likelihood that they will correctly engage in that target behavior. We all have prompts that we use. There are apps on our phones, we can set reminders, and even set up an alarm clock. You may make lists of things that you need to do. These are all prompts, and they're seen or heard daily in almost every environment. In Webmodule number 4, we actually cover prompting in detail if you're interested in learning more. There are 6 different types of prompts that can be given to support students with disabilities, in the order of least restrictive to most restrictive. Visual prompts is the least restrictive. This can be a picture card or even a written schedule. Positional prompts are when we actually place items in front of a student or in a location or a sequence that ensures successful completion of the activity. The third is a gestural prompt. And a gestural prompt is when staff points or uses a hand gesture or even a head nod to encourage participation. Next is model prompt, and that's where you actually demonstrate the behavior to be performed. You, in essence, are the model for that student. Next is physical prompts. Physical prompts are when you physically guide or touch a student to help them to complete a target behavior or skill. There are 2 different types, partial physical is when you provide some assistance to guide a student through part of a requested activity. It is less intrusive than a full physical prompt. Full physical is when you guide a student's hands or body to complete the task thoroughly. It is often referred to as hand over hand. The final type of prompt is a verbal prompt. A verbal prompt is where we vocally ask or tell a student what to do. Within verbal prompting, we have indirect, which is where we ask the student what to do, such as, "What's next?" and direct, where we actually tell them what we want them to do. This is often when we begin to see prompt dependency in students. In classrooms, verbals are the easiest form of prompts to give due to so many moving pieces in the class and multitasking requirements. For this reason, we have placed it as one of the most restrictive prompts we could use. Please complete the processing guide for this slide. Prompting is meant to go away. So you can ask, is the student independent at a skill? Is it time to fade? Prompt fading is where we remove prompts by gradually reducing the frequency or the strength of the prompt. Remember to always use the least restrictive prompt possible. Here's an example of a literal definition of prompt fading. On the top line, we see the A is very dark. As it goes through each line afterwards, it gets fainter or lighter to see, so that eventually the student will be forming the letter A without any type of visual prompt here. Shaping refers to the process of reinforcing closer and closer approximations to the long-term goal or skill. Shaping can be accomplished by first identifying what the ultimate target behavior is and then providing reinforcement for behaviors that are close and closer to the goal. Here we see a dad praising the young boy for attempting to give a high five. Notice that his hand is not perfectly aligned with the adults, but he is pretty close, and the dad is giving him reinforcement of positive praise and facial expressions to show his happiness and pleasure. Next, we will review the techniques behind applied behavioral analysis. The most common ABA techniques used in schools are discrete trial, naturalistic training, pivotal response, and token economy. In discrete trial training, it is based upon the principle of breaking down behavior into discrete steps called a single teaching unit or a learning trial. Naturalistic teaching is where we actually integrate the principles of ABA into the natural environment or their everyday routine and activities so that the skill can be more generalized. Pivotal response is when a foundational practice used to teach target skills and increase desired behavior by understanding what motivates that student and using that in order to teach. And finally, token economy. A token economy is when you give a student a token or an item when they successfully complete a desired skill or task. Tokens add up to allow access to a highly preferred item of the student's choosing. Reinforcement is a visual way to reinforce the student to complete steps of a task. Many students in our regionalized programs use these reinforcement systems. You will not be required to know how to use these techniques, but the purpose of this slide is to begin using some of the educational terms that are often related to applied behavioral analysis in our classrooms. If you want to learn more about these techniques and others, feel free to join a firm, which we will discuss later in this presentation. Please take a moment to complete the processing guide for this slide. Finally, we will review some additional resources. The National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders developed free professional resources for staff who work with individuals with autism. Resources include detailed information on how to plan, implement, and monitor specific evidence-based practices. As we have said throughout this training, evidence-based practices are not only for students with autism, but other special ed designations as well. Using evidence-based practices is in the best interest of the child as it has research behind it. AFFIRM stands for Autism Focused Intervention, Resources, and Modules, and is an extension of the National Professional Development Center on Autism. You can access their resources by going to the link on this slide. Please complete the processing guide for this slide. CAPTAIN was created for the state of California to assist professionals in implementing evidence-based practices. CAPTAIN stands for California Professional Training and Information Network. It was created specifically for students with the disability of autism. However, we know that evidence-based practices can benefit many students with different disabilities. CAPTAIN has resources and trainings that are free and can be accessed online by going to the link below. Please complete the processing guide for this slide. Remember that each web module has additional resources available on the Padlet. If you want to see discrete trial training, naturalistic intervention, and pivotal response training, go to web module number 6 and scroll down to the videos explaining and demonstrating these techniques. You can also join AFFIRM for free to gain additional knowledge. This Padlet will be updated as information changes. Thank you for participating with the Instructional Assistant Web Module number 6 on Applied Behavioral Analysis.